Imagine waking up one morning to find the stars completely gone, blotted out by an alien fleet so massive it creates its own night, and their message is simple: join our empire or we'll turn your planet into a parking lot. If you're the kind of person who'd still refuse to bow, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because you're about to hear your new favorite story. We're talking about 300 warships, the personal welcoming committee of the Galactic Hegemony Council. Each ship was larger than a city, designed specifically to crush your spirit before a single shot was fired. From his command chair, Grand Admiral Zixth watched Earth with his 4 gleaming eyes. This was step 1 of a 50,000-year-old strategy that had a perfect track record. First, show up with overwhelming force. Second, play a horror film starring all the planets you've already annihilated. And third, sit back and wait for the new species to have a complete nervous breakdown. The hegemony ships weren't just built for war, they were decorated for it. Their hulls were armored with the actual skeletons of species they had exterminated. Giant tattered flags, stitched together from the banners of conquered worlds, flew between cannons the size of skyscrapers. And to top it all off, every ship was broadcasting a symphony of horror, a collection of the last words and final screams from hundreds of civilizations that no longer existed. This was psychological warfare turned up to 11. The human diplomatic vessel is on approach, his second-in-command announced. He was a lanky alien whose skin shifted colors with his mood. At the moment, he was a shimmering, prideful shade of purple. Zixth just grinned. From his perspective, humans were galactic toddlers who had just figured out how to leave their crib. They had only been traveling between stars for a few hundred years, controlling a tiny little patch of about 30 solar systems. Their technology was, frankly, adorable. And their military was basically a neighborhood watch program with small patrol ships that would be lucky to scratch the paint on one of his destroyers. The human ship that approached his fleet was like a goldfish swimming up to a blue whale. It was small, sleek, and practical. No spooky bone decorations, no threatening light shows. It was just a ship, almost painfully sensible. "On the main viewer," Zixth ordered. "Let's get this surrender over with. I'm getting hungry." The screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the human ship. A lone man stood there in a simple, crisp uniform. He had dark hair and calm, sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything without a hint of fear. Their intelligence files identified him as Captain Park Minjin, a diplomatic nobody. "Captain Park," Zixth's voice thundered, a sound literally designed to shake small moons. "You are witnessing the power of the Galactic Hegemony Council, an alliance of 4,000 species spanning over 70,000 worlds. Now, let me show you what happens to those who say no." With a lazy flick of his wrist, Zixth started the show. Gigantic holographic images erupted between the two fleets, showing world after world being consumed by fire. Cities turned to dust. Panicked aliens fled for their lives. It was a highlight reel of planetary destruction, perfectly edited to cause maximum despair. The videos showed parents begging for the lives of their children and brave warriors dropping their weapons in utter defeat. It was a masterclass in capturing the exact moment a species breaks. The entire time, Zixth kept his eyes locked on Captain Park's face, waiting for it to crumble. This was his favorite part. The trembling hands, the beads of sweat, the silent scream that forms in their eyes. Some of them would weep, others would try to put on a brave face while their legs shook. But all of them, in that single moment, understood that resistance was pointless. Captain Park's reaction, though, was strange. His lips were pressed together in a thin, white line, as if he was using all his willpower to hold something in. His shoulders had a tiny, barely noticeable vibration. Zixth wondered if this was how humans displayed terror. The intel on their body language was a bit vague. "This is the cost of defiance," Zixth bellowed, really getting into the performance. He'd done this speech 1,000 times. "The hegemony gives you a simple choice: submit and your people survive. Resist and you will be utterly erased. All of a sudden, Captain Park slapped a hand over his mouth, let out a strangled noise, and his face flushed a deep crimson. Ah, there we go, Zix thought, filled with smug satisfaction. The terror is finally breaking through. The human was trying to keep his composure, but his body was failing him. We have shattered empires with weapons beyond your comprehension, Zix continued, savoring the moment. We have toppled civilizations that ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years before your species learned to make fire. We have turned entire planets into monuments of our power, a warning to any who would even think of challenging us. He then instructed the holograms to zoom in on the skulls mounted on his flagship, each one a trophy from a species that chose poorly. The camera lingered on a few of the more exotic-looking skulls, a quiet testament to the hegemony's absolute dominance. By this point, Captain Park's shoulders were shaking uncontrollably. He looked like he was struggling for air, his face was the color of a ripe tomato, and his eyes were watering. I must, Park stammered, his voice thick with emotion. I need to request a short recess to consult with my government. This is an incredibly significant decision. Hook, line, and sinker, Zix thought, a self-satisfied grin stretching across his face. The human was so petrified he could barely speak. He was just trying to stall for a few miserable hours, hoping for a miracle that would never come. You have 12 of your hours, Zix granted him magnanimously. Consider your choices carefully, Captain Park. Look at our ships, count the cannons, and understand that this is but a fraction of our true might. I will be expecting your unconditional surrender when you call back. With a final dramatic flourish, he cut the transmission. Zix turned to his bridge crew, his expression triumphant. Another one for the archives. Now let's dial up the pressure. I want all intimidation systems at maximum. By the time that captain calls us back, he'll be begging to surrender. The crew immediately got to work, a well-practiced orchestra of terror. Across the entire armada, more menacing lights began to flash, more ghostly screams echoed through the void, and the ships shifted into an even more threatening formation. But what Zix couldn't see was that aboard that tiny human ship, Captain Park Minjin had finally lost his battle for composure. He wasn't terrified. He wasn't crying. He was laughing. He was laughing so hard that tears were streaming down his cheeks, and every time he glanced at the replay of the hegemony's intimidation fleet, he would double over, roaring with laughter all over again. And all around him, every single member of his crew was doing the exact same thing. "Sir," his first officer said, wiping a tear of pure hilarity from her eye, "I'm trying to draft this report for Earth Command, but I can't type straight. Did you see the skulls they hot-glued to their ships? It looks like they raided a spirit Halloween." Park took a huge, shuddering breath, trying to regain control. I know. We have to be professional about this. They obviously take this very seriously, even if it's the single most ridiculous thing I've ever witnessed. He opened a secure line to Earth, and a moment later, the faces of humanity's top military and political leaders appeared. Park did his level best to deliver the report with a straight face, describing the fleet, the threats, and the entire spooky show. When he finished, there was a long, stunned silence from the command center. Then, a general let out a tiny snort. A second later, the entire room exploded into a tidal wave of gut-busting laughter. "My apologies, Captain," Admiral Kim said, struggling to breathe. "But did they honestly believe that skulls were going to scare us? Did they do, 5 minutes of research on our species?" "All evidence suggests no, Admiral," Park replied. "They seemed incredibly proud of them. I think this tactic must actually work on other races." "Oh, it's highly effective," a new voice interjected. It was Dr. Sarah Martinez, Earth's leading expert in xenopsychology. "Most species that achieve space travel are collaborative. They tend to be peaceful, cautious, community-focused organisms. To them, the entire concept of violent death is fundamentally horrifying," she explained. "But humans, we're the freaks of the galaxy. We are one of the only apex predators to ever leave our planet. We evolved for millions of years by being both the hunter and the hunted. For us, death isn't some terrifying abstract concept, it's practically a celebrity. We've spent our entire history telling stories about it, making art about it, and building multi-billion-dollar industries around it. So their big, scary psychological attack just bounces right off us, Park said as the realization dawned on him. It's even better than that, Martinez corrected, a massive grin spreading across her face. It doesn't just fail to scare us, it lands squarely in a category we find hilarious. This over-the-top, trying way too hard to be scary stuff. We invented genres for it. We call them B-horror movies, haunted house attractions, and heavy metal. We literally pay for this kind of experience for fun. Imagine being sent on a diplomatic mission that everyone thinks is a welcome party, only to find yourself staring down the barrels of an alien armada that looks like it was designed by a heavy metal band. That was my life. Our tiny fleet, built for handshakes, not dogfights, was facing a fleet captained by a guy named Park from a group calling themselves the Hegemony. Back on Earth, nobody believed they'd actually shoot. I mean, why put on a light show that spectacular if you were just going to blow us up? As our ships got into position, my crew wasn't at their battle stations. They were glued to the windows, snapping pictures. Within minutes, those photos went viral. And aboard his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Grand Admiral Zixth was starting to get a major headache. My intelligence officers were supposed to be intercepting humanity's panicked, encrypted cries for help. Instead, they were picking up something else. My top analyst looked at me, her voice shaking with utter confusion. "Admiral, the humans are broadcasting on open frequencies. It's not code. They're calling it social media." "Show me," I commanded. The main view screen lit up with a wild flood of human messages. I watched completely stunned as human sailors posted photos of my terrifying armada with captions like, "Okay, this is the coolest haunted house I've ever seen," and "Wow, these aliens do not mess around when it comes to Halloween decorations." They were comparing my top-of-the-line warships to amusement park rides and saying we were trying a little too hard to be spooky. One post, which was getting a ridiculous number of likes, was a zoom-in on the terrifying skull emblem of my flagship. The human text written over it said, "This is what happens when you get your galaxy-conquering fleet from a pop-up Halloween store." "What is Halloween?" I demanded. The word felt strange in my mouth. My xenocultural advisor, a scholar who'd studied thousands of alien cultures, started frantically searching our databases. The answer he gave me only made things stranger. "Sir, it appears to be a human holiday. They dress up in scary outfits and decorate their homes with symbols of death, for fun. It seems to be primarily for their children." A feeling of pure, unfiltered confusion washed over me, something I hadn't felt in my entire military career. They have their children celebrate death as a form of play? The data confirms it, Admiral. They also pay money to go to places called haunted houses, where other humans deliberately try to frighten them in a safe setting. They seem to find this entertaining. Right then, another officer interrupted. "Sir, Captain Park is hailing us. He says he's ready to present humanity's official response." I straightened my uniform, trying to shake off the weirdness. This had to be a trick, some kind of bizarre coping mechanism. Some species used humor to mask their terror. Yes, that must be it. "Put him on screen," I ordered. Captain Park's face appeared, looking way more chill than he should have. He had the calm look of a professional diplomat, but I could swear I saw the hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Grand Admiral Zixth," Park started, "I've spoken with my government, and we have an official reply to your demands. But first, we were hoping you could answer a cultural question for us." "Get on with it," I said, my patience wearing thin. "The design of your fleet is unbelievably detailed. You've clearly put a massive amount of work into it. We just wanted to be sure we understand what you were going for. Is all of this," Park made a vague gesture, "supposed to be scary?" The question came so far out of left field that I was speechless for a moment. Of course it's supposed to be scary. It symbolizes the end of all who oppose the hegemony. Park nodded like he was considering it. Right, got it. Grand Admiral, I think we're having a little cultural misunderstanding here. You see, we humans, we tend to react a bit differently to scary visuals and threats than you might be used to. He gave a command, and new pictures flashed on the screen, showing human children in skeleton pajamas, holding bags full of candy. There were photos of houses covered in fake tombstones and friendly-looking ghosts. Then came videos of people screaming with laughter as they were chased through dark hallways by actors in monster makeup. This, Park said gently, is Halloween. It's one of our biggest holidays. We use skulls and skeletons for party decorations. We go out of our way to find things that will scare us, because we think it's fun when we know it's not a real threat. More images appeared. Posters for horror movies called Alien Invasion and Space Monsters, book covers with horrifying alien creatures, and ads for theme parks with giant, elaborate monster statues. We have entire billion-dollar industries built around creating scary things just to entertain ourselves, Park went on. For us, when something tries this hard to look terrifying, our brain doesn't see a threat. It sees a familiar pattern, assumes it's all part of a show, and the result is, well, we usually think it's pretty funny. I just stared, my mind scrambling to make sense of what he was saying. Are you telling me that our fleet, a design perfected over 50,000 years of galactic warfare, looks like a theme park attraction to you? Park's expression changed to one of what looked like actual pity. I'm saying it's a cultural blind spot for us, Admiral. We appreciate the effort. But the fact that we can see you trying so hard to be intimidating tells us that you're probably not a real threat. Truly dangerous things don't need a costume. They just are. All around my command bridge, my officers were staring at each other in total shock. Our greatest weapon, the psychological warfare that had brought hundreds of worlds to their knees without a single shot, was completely useless. It was a joke to these weird primates who had somehow turned fear itself into a hobby. Something inside me finally broke. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was pure, white-hot anger mixed with a deep, burning humiliation. Enough! My voice thundered across the deck. If they won't fear our looks, they will fear our weapons. Power up all weapon systems. We will give them a real reason to be afraid. Across the entire hegemony fleet, weapons of incredible power hummed to life. Planet-cracking cannons emerged from their armored shells. Bays of antimatter torpedoes hissed open, showing off warheads that could turn a solar system into stardust. Quantum destabilizers, designed to rip holes in the fabric of space itself, began to glow with a terrifying energy. "Target their nearest moon!" I screamed. "Let's see if the humans find this entertaining!" The entire fleet fired at once. The moon, a silent witness to billions of years of history, simply vanished. The siege cannons broke it into a million pieces. The antimatter warheads turned the debris to vapor. The quantum destabilizers erased the remaining dust from existence, leaving nothing but empty space where a world used to be. "Again!" I roared. "Target the asteroid belt!" A horrifying light show erupted, with each blast showcasing a different, terrifying power of the hegemony's military. It was a demonstration of absolute force that should have made any other species in the galaxy fall to their knees and beg for mercy. On the human ships, however, a very different conversation was happening. The reaction was not what I'd expected. "Whoa, did you guys see the containment field on that antimatter torpedo?" An engineer yelled over an open channel. "That magnetic bottle is hundreds of years ahead of our tech." "Forget that. Get a sensor lock on their quantum destabilizer," another voice shouted back, buzzing with excitement. "They're using a cascading effect to peel back layers of reality. I've got to get this data back to the labs on Earth." "Don't worry, I'm recording everything in high definition," a third voice said calmly. "This is the single greatest weapons demonstration our military has ever seen, and the best part is, it's totally free. We're getting perfect technical readouts on their entire arsenal." I listened to the intercepted chatter, my jaw hanging open. They weren't scared. They were thrilled. They were treating my display of world-ending power like a free masterclass, taking notes like they were in a university lecture. "Explain this," I snarled at my xenocultural advisor. The poor guy was sweating bullets as he tried to process the new data. "Admiral, it seems humans have a cultural obsession with something they call reverse engineering. Their entire technological history is based on looking at a complex piece of tech and immediately wanting to take it apart to see how it works." "All intelligent species do that," I snapped. "Yes, Admiral, but with humans, it's practically a national sport, a puzzle. Seeing better technology doesn't make them feel weak. It makes them excited to figure it out and build their own better version. Their first faster-than-light engine was built because they saw a natural wormhole and just worked backward from what they saw." At that exact moment, another officer came up to me, his face pale. "Sir, we're getting official hails from 3 different human science stations. They're asking if we have any unexploded weapons they could have for research purposes. They want to study our weapons, Admiral. They're asking for free samples." They thought this was the perfect shakedown, the kind of terrifying power play that had forced 1,000 different worlds to bow down. So why did Grand Admiral Zixth suddenly feel like he was stuck working a help desk? A message just popped up on his main screen that read, "That antimatter containment field you showed off could solve a few major engineering problems for us. Any chance we could get a closer look at one that's still in one piece?" Before he could even process that level of nerve, Captain Park's face appeared again, looking almost embarrassed. "Grand Admiral," he said, "so sorry about how eager our science team is. Your little weapons show was, let's just say, super interesting from a technical standpoint. But my superiors asked me to explain a little something about human psychology that might help clear all this up." Zixth just stared, feeling the entire situation slipping right through his fingers. This cheeky little human had just turned his galactic threat into a guest lecture. You see, there's a phrase our scientists use to describe humanity. "We're persistence hunters," Park began, his voice as calm and patient as a favorite teacher. "We grew up on a planet that was, and I'm not kidding, actively trying to unalive us. We have superstorms that can literally wipe cities off the map, animals that are perfectly evolved to hunt things our size, and viruses that change faster than we can find ways to fight them. Our world has disasters that can redraw continents overnight." Behind him, pictures of Earth filled the screen. A terrifying hurricane churning over an ocean, a volcano spitting out enough ash to blot out the sun, the very ground ripping itself apart in an earthquake, and floodwaters swallowing entire countries. It was a planet of beautiful, deadly violence. "To survive that," Park said, "you have to learn to think a certain way. An obstacle isn't a brick wall. It's just a puzzle you haven't figured out yet. When we see something huge and dangerous, our first thought isn't to run," he continued. "It's to figure out how it works, take it apart, and learn how to beat it." New images flashed on the screen, this time from human history. People climbing the world's tallest, most dangerous mountains just to say they did it. People diving to the deepest, most crushing parts of the ocean just to see what was down there. People strapping themselves to giant, controlled explosions and aiming them at the moon long before they even knew if they'd survive, all because they just had to know. "We also got really good at spotting a real threat," Park added. "Things that just make a lot of noise and flash a lot of lights. They don't really ring our alarm bells. On Earth, the things that will actually get you don't waste energy looking scary. A tiger doesn't roar before it pounces. A tsunami doesn't fire a warning shot," Park finished. "Real danger is quiet." A cold, sinking feeling started to grow in the pit of Zixth's stomach. "Are you trying to tell me that our show of force proves we aren't a real threat?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm telling you," Park replied, picking his words with care, "that your big show proves you'd rather not have a real fight. Species that are actually committed to wiping someone out don't show off their toys first. They just start firing." He let that hang in the air for a moment. Your big, flashy fireworks display tells us you think a war would be expensive, even for an empire as big as yours." Zixth's Peltherin advisor began to nod his head slowly. "He's right, Admiral. Our entire military strategy is built on scaring enemies into surrendering, because a real war is messy and costs a fortune. We have just never met a species that saw through the act so fast," the advisor admitted in a low voice. "Oh, and one more thing," Park went on. "Humans have been the top predator on our world for hundreds of thousands of years. We're used to being the most dangerous thing in the room. So when we see a huge show of force, it doesn't scare us. It makes us curious, and it gets our best minds thinking." Right on cue, a new human broadcast was picked up and thrown onto the main screen. It was a live feed from a military strategy room. Human officers were calmly talking about how to fight Zixth's fleet. They weren't panicking or trying to figure out how to escape. They were systematically breaking down how to win. Going by those energy readings, their main cannons take about 40 seconds to charge up, one analyst pointed out, his voice completely calm. That gives us a big enough window to get in close and hit their weapon emitters directly. Another voice chimed in. "The antimatter torpedoes are a problem, but they're slow. Our defensive grid should be able to shoot most of them down if we stay at the right distance." "The quantum destabilizers are the biggest headache," a third officer said. "But it looks like they need a coordinated shot from several ships to work. If we can break up their formation, we can basically shut down that entire weapon system." A tidal wave of pure terror crashed over Zixth. The humans weren't afraid of his power. They were reverse engineering it, dissecting it, looking for its weaknesses. While his mighty fleet was posing for the cameras, the humans were calmly planning a war like it was just another item on their daily agenda. "Captain Park," Zixth said, his voice almost gone, "are you saying that nothing we've shown you has scared you at all?" Park actually looked like he was thinking about the question for a second. "Your technology is incredible, Grand Admiral. Your weapons are powerful, and your fleet is massive. But no, we're not scared. If you were really going to wipe us out, you would have done it already. Instead, you're talking. And talking means you want something from us, which means we can make a deal." The communication channel went dark. Zixth stood on the bridge of his flagship, a 50,000-year-old military strategy built on fear, completely taken apart by a species that had barely figured out how to leave its own solar system. He was now facing a choice he had never, ever had to make before, fighting a real war against an enemy that just refused to be scared. It would be ugly, it would be costly, and if the galaxy found out the hegemony's bite wasn't nearly as bad as its bark, other races might start getting brave. But before he could even give an order, every single alarm on every ship in both fleets started screaming at once. "Admiral!" his sensor officer shouted, all four of his arms a blur across his control panel. "Dark space rupture! We've got multiple signatures showing up at the edge of the system." On the main view screen, space itself seemed to rip open, and through these bleeding gashes in reality, something ancient and truly evil began to pull itself into their universe. Zixth's blood ran cold. He knew those energy readings. "The Zilth," he whispered. They were the galaxy's real boogeymen. The Zilth didn't conquer people. They were a force of nature, a cosmic plague that wiped the galaxy clean every few hundred years. Their ships weren't built. They were grown, horrifying, living monsters that fed on life itself. They never sent messages. They never made threats. They just ate. They would sterilize entire sections of the galaxy of every living thing, leaving behind nothing but a graveyard of cold, dead worlds. The Zilth fleet was smaller than the hegemonies, but that didn't matter one bit. Their ships were twisted, pulsing nightmares of organic flesh. There was no design to them, no showing off, no attempt to look scary. They were just pure, deadly purpose. "All ships, defensive formations!" Zixth screamed, his voice cracking with a fear that was suddenly horribly real. "Get ready for an emergency jump!" All across his fleet, discipline crumbled into chaos. You couldn't bluff this enemy. This was the monster that other monsters ran away from. But on the human ships, the reaction was completely, shockingly different. Captain Park's voice cut through the panicked noise, no longer the calm professor, but sharp as a shard of glass. All human ships, execute combat formation Delta. All weapons to maximum power. I want targeting solutions on those hostiles now. Zixth stared, absolutely stunned, as the small human fleet, instead of running, pulled its formation tighter and charged forward. They were intentionally putting themselves between the Zilth and Zixth's own terrified fleet. "Captain Park," Zixth yelled into his communicator, "you have no idea what you're dealing with. You can't fight them. You can't make a deal with them. Your only chance is to run." Park's face flashed onto his screen, and the look in his eyes was colder and more terrifying than the Zilth themselves. The friendly teacher was gone. In his place was a man with eyes like steel, completely empty of fear. "We know exactly what they are, Admiral," Park said, his voice dangerously low. "We've run into their kind before. 3 years ago, one of their little scouting parties tried to harvest one of our colonies in the outer system." He paused for a second, letting the words sink in. "We took out every last one of them." "That's impossible," Zixth stuttered. "No one fights the Zilth and lives." "We," Park shot back, "are not no one. To all hegemony ships, we are sending our tactical data to your network right now. Forget your energy weapons, they're useless. Their hulls are organic and can take the heat, but they shatter like glass from a kinetic strike. Their regeneration cores are right here, here, and here," Captain Park's voice commanded as a stream of targeting data flooded the hegemony command systems. "If you plan on leaving this star system in one piece, you will follow our lead without question." The Zilth fleet swarmed forward, a silent, terrifying wave of pure biological hunger. It didn't care if a ship was human or hegemony. To the Zilth, everything was just food. "Admiral," his tactical officer stammered, his voice filled with shock, "the human ships, they're moving to engage. They're using their own fleet as a shield. For us." Zixth stared at his screen, trying to process something that simply didn't compute. The very species his fleet had come to bully into submission, the creatures they had dismissed as insignificant and weak, were now throwing themselves in harm's way to save his fleet from total annihilation. It defied every law of galactic conquest he had ever known. The Zilth attacked first. Huge blobs of glowing bioplasma, a corrosive acid designed to eat through standard shields, soared toward the human vessels. The humans didn't even try to evade. Their shields flared up like miniature suns, absorbing the impacts, and they returned fire in the same heartbeat. Human weapons were nothing like the hegemony's advanced technology. While the hegemony fought with graceful energy lances and complex particle torpedoes, the human weapons were raw, brutal, and had a strange beauty in their sheer simplicity. The weapons they used were something we had never seen before. Massive accelerators that launched solid metal slugs at a fraction of the speed of light, and missiles packed with so much kinetic force they didn't even need warheads. They just punched clean through anything in their path. The first Zilth cruiser hit by a human railgun didn't explode. It was literally ripped in two. Its living hull, bioengineered to heal from laser fire and plasma burns, had absolutely no defense against a giant metal crowbar screaming through its vital organs. They actually know how to destroy them," Zixth's tactical officer whispered, his voice thick with astonishment. "The humans know how to kill the Zilth." In that moment, a voice cut through the chaos on an open channel. A voice heard by every single ship in both fleets. It was Captain Park, and his tone was as calm and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, the voice of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. "Human fleet, execute attack pattern Gamma. Hegemony ships, if you want to help, focus all your fire on the targets we've already cracked open for you. Don't bother trying to make new holes. Just pour everything you've got into the weak points we're creating." One of Zixth's junior officers whipped around to face him, his eyes shining with a sudden wild hope. "Admiral, your orders?" In that single second, Admiral Zixth made a choice that would have been utterly unthinkable just an hour ago. All ships, you heard the man. Follow his lead. Fire every weapon you have exactly where he points. We either fight alongside them or this is where we die." The hegemony fleet, which had arrived as a proud conquering armada, now scrambled to fall into formation with the human ships. It was a clumsy, chaotic ballet between two fleets that had never worked together, trying to find a rhythm in the middle of a massacre. But the humans were shockingly agile, adjusting their own lines instantly to cover the hegemony's weaknesses and complement their strengths. A massive Zilth harvester ship zeroed in on a hegemony dreadnought, its horrifying biomechanical arms reaching out to literally tear the vessel apart. Before those limbs could even touch the dreadnought's armor, 3 human destroyers descended on it like a wolf pack, their weapons ripping into the organic monster with a cold and terrifying precision. "Hegemony Dreadnought Valor's call. Pull back and let your shields recharge," Park's voice ordered over the comms. "We'll handle this." All Zixth could do was watch as the humans fought with a level of ferocity he had never seen before. They weren't fighting for honor or to make a statement. They were fighting to wipe out a plague. Their ships absorbed damage that would have sent his own crews fleeing for the escape pods, but the humans just kept attacking. When their shields buckled, they didn't retreat. They just kept firing. When their hulls were breached, exposing them to the absolute zero of space, they just diverted power from life support to keep their cannons firing. He watched in a state of horrified admiration as one human cruiser, its entire port side a mess of molten wreckage, deliberately slammed itself into a Zilth harvester. The resulting explosion vaporized them both, but it shattered the Zilth line just long enough for another wave of human ships to surge into the breach. "Captain Park's ship is taking heavy fire," one of Zixth's officers shouted. "His shields are down to 15%. Zixth glanced at his tactical map. Park's ship, the same diplomatic vessel that had initiated this entire encounter, was holding the single most vital point in the battle, intentionally drawing fire from 3 Zilth cruisers to allow a crippled hegemony battleship to escape. "All ships in range!" Zixth bellowed, his voice echoing across his bridge. "Concentrate all fire on the Zilth vessels targeting Captain Park, now!" The hegemony fleet moved as one. Dozens of warships unleashed a furious storm of energy beams and torpedoes at the ships menacing the human captain. The onslaught of firepower crashed into targets whose defenses had already been shattered by human railguns. The combined assault was overwhelming. The Zilth, now facing a united enemy fighting with a terrifying new aggression and losing ships too fast to count, finally broke. Their grotesque living vessels turned and fled, slinking back toward the dark voids of space they'd come from, searching for easier meals somewhere else in the cosmos. As the final Zilth ship warped away, a deep, weary quiet settled over the two fleets. The human ships were scarred and battered, some barely more than drifting tombs, but they hadn't broken. Instead, they had just saved the very fleet that had come to demand their surrender. Zixth opened a secure channel to Captain Park. The human's face appeared on the main screen. His uniform was torn, his face was smeared with grime, and the bridge behind him was a mess of sparking consoles and crew members rushing to put out fires. "Captain Park," Zixth began, weighing his words with care, "you risked everything, your ships, your people, to save us. Why?" Park looked completely exhausted, but his eyes were like steel. "Because the Zilth were the real threat here, Admiral. You're just another expanding empire looking for territory. That's just business. The Zilth erase entire species from the galaxy. That's a completely different kind of problem. We know how to tell the difference. Your people fight with a ferocity I could not have possibly imagined," Zixth confessed. "You saw our fleet, you heard our ultimatum for your surrender, and you laughed at us. You figured we weren't a credible threat," Park countered. "But humanity learned a very, very long time ago that the animals that puff up their chests and roar the loudest are almost never the ones you actually have to fear. The Zilth don't make threats. They don't posture. They just appear and start killing. That's what a real monster is. And that's when we stop laughing." As the human ships began to conduct field repairs right there in the vacuum, the hegemony fleet simply hung in space, its crews in a state of stunned silence. The mission to intimidate humanity had been an absolute failure, but something far more valuable had been forged in the fire of that battle. It was respect, and the price had been paid in blood and solid steel. Grand Admiral Zixth sat in his command chair, reviewing the battle logs for the third time. What he was watching went against every known tactic of space warfare. The humans weren't just skilled. They fought with a savage, relentless determination that was deeply unsettling. When their shields failed, they relied on their armor plating. When their armor was stripped away, they used their own crippled ships as weapons. When the situation seemed hopeless, they just found a way to hit even harder. But it wasn't just blind rage. Every single action was calculated. Every sacrifice had a strategic purpose. The humans fought as if this was just another day at the office, against an enemy that had made his own legendary fleet seem like a collection of toys. "Admiral," his xenocultural specialist interrupted his thoughts, his voice quiet. "I've been doing a deeper dive into human military records. I strongly suggest you look at this." The scholar brought up data that painted a truly terrifying picture. Humanity's entire history was one long, continuous war, not just against alien species, but against their own world, against plagues, and most viciously, against each other. "Humans have been fighting for their entire existence," the advisor said, his voice shaking slightly. "Not like us, with the occasional squabble over a border. I mean constant, non-stop, brutal warfare. For humanity, peace is not their natural state. It's just the brief pause they take to reload their weapons." Grand Admiral Zixth stared at the history files, utterly baffled. He'd seen footage of humanity's past, empires forged in fire, technologies born for the sole purpose of ending lives more efficiently, and entire societies that glorified conflict. Their very stories were drenched in it. "But that isn't what makes them so terrifying," his advisor's voice echoed in his mind. "It's that they are by turns the most viciously competitive and the most profoundly cooperative species we have ever encountered. One moment, they'll kill each other over a patch of worthless dirt. The next, they'll unite into an unbreakable wall against a common foe. They have these armies, massive organized groups dedicated to the art of war." Zixth whispered, "Most races abandon such primitive concepts long before they reach for the stars." The advisor's voice was grim. "Indeed. Most species figure out how to coexist first, and then they invent starships. Humans invented starships to find new people to fight," his advisor had concluded. "They're an apex predator that developed intelligence but never lost the killer instinct." The briefing cut off as Captain Park's face filled the main view screen. He looked composed now, in a crisp new uniform, but his eyes held the same unwavering intensity. "Grand Admiral, I believe it's time we discussed our next move." Zixth straightened in his command chair. "I concur, Captain. The initial purpose of my visit has become, well, let's just say it's no longer relevant." "That's one way to put it," Captain Park countered, a faint smirk touching his lips but never reaching his weary eyes. "Let's be honest. You showed up here to flex your muscles and scare us into being the newest addition to your empire. We laughed at you. Then we turned around and saved your entire fleet from being vaporized. I'm guessing your first contact manual doesn't have a chapter for this particular situation." "No, Captain, it does not," Admiral Zixth admitted freely. "To be perfectly candid, I have no protocol for what happens now. My mission is an absolute failure, yet the Hegemony Council will demand a full accounting." Park nodded slowly, a look of understanding on his face. "Then allow me to add a footnote to your report about something your intel people missed. We weren't laughing because we thought you were weak. We were laughing because trying to intimidate humanity is like trying to scare a tidal wave by shouting at it." "I'm starting to grasp that," Zixth confessed, his voice tight. "But you still don't get the why," Captain Park said, his tone shifting to something almost educational. "Listen, for millennia, humans were just another item on the menu for 1,000 different predators on our own world. We got really, really good at telling the difference between a loud noise and a genuine threat. Real predators, Admiral, don't roar to announce they're about to attack. Real danger doesn't flash its lights and sound a siren. The way you guys entered our system, our gut instinct told us you were posturing, not hunting, so we were amused. And the Zilth? Zixth asked. Park's casual demeanor evaporated instantly. The Zilth are a real threat. They don't give speeches, they don't make demands, they just erase. When their scouts found our colony on Elysium 3 years ago, they opened fire without a word. They turned 80,000 of my people to ash before we even knew a war had started. We didn't learn to fight them because we wanted to. We learned because it was that or extinction, Park continued, his face setting like granite. We followed those scouts back to their nest and scrubbed it from the star maps. We hunted down every last Zilth ship in this sector and took them apart, bolt by bolt. Not for glory, not for revenge. We did it because we knew that if a single one got away, they'd just come back to murder more families. That kind of focused aggression against the Zilth is unheard of, Zixth said, genuinely stunned. Is it? Or maybe most species just never had to fight their way to the top of a planetary food chain just to see the next sunrise. Park leaned closer to the camera. Let me tell you what a human being really is, Admiral. We are persistence predators. Our ancestors evolved to literally run their prey to death, to chase it until its heart burst from exhaustion. We are pack hunters who create complex strategies on the fly. We are toolmakers who were shaping stone into weapons long before we learned how to grow our own food. But more than anything else, we are survivors. We have dragged ourselves through one apocalypse after another and have stubbornly refused to lay down and die. He pointed towards the view screen, which now showed the damaged but resolute human fleet. You just watched us fight the Zilth. That's what we look like when we're done being amused. We don't fight for show. We don't fight for honor. We fight to win. And we don't stop until the threat is gone, permanently. A chill, something akin to primal fear, traced a path down Zixth's central nerve. You're saying your entire species is inherently violent. Not at all, Park corrected him sharply. I'm saying we're survivors. Violence is just one of many tools we have, and it's the one we are most reluctant to use. You need to understand this. We would always rather cooperate than conflict. We'd rather build a bridge than see it burn. We will always, without fail, choose the path of peace if it's genuinely offered. But, Zix prompted, sensing the unspoken condition hanging in the space between them. But when peace is not an option, when our homes are threatened, or when we have given our word to protect an ally, well, we become exceptionally good at violence, because as a species, we have been practicing for our entire existence. Park's posture shifted, his casual lean replaced by a formal military bearing. So, Grand Admiral, here is humanity's official response to your offer. We will not be subjects of the hegemony. We categorically reject any claim to our territory. However, we are very willing to open diplomatic channels, to sign trade agreements, and even to form a military alliance for mutual defense. Today, prove that we are the kind of friends you want watching your back when things get ugly. The Council will never agree to such a proposal, Zixth stated, though the certainty in his own voice was already fading. The Council will agree to whatever you recommend, Park countered smoothly. You're the Grand Admiral. You have the authority to renegotiate, and I think, if you're being honest, you know that trying to force humanity to kneel would cost you far more in blood and resources than you could ever hope to gain. Making us your friends is the only profitable move. Zixth thought about it. He pictured the battle again, how the smaller human ships had moved to shield his own command vessel, even after he had threatened their world with annihilation. He remembered the cold, efficient way they had dissected the Zilth fleet, and the terrifying realization that if that same focus were ever turned on the hegemony, the result would be a slaughter. What you're proposing is without precedent, he finally said. No species has ever refused the hegemony's offer of integration and remained independent. Then we'll be the first, Park replied with a simple shrug. Admiral, you came here with a fleet designed to put on a show and make us cower, but humans aren't scared by loud noises and bright lights. We respect capability, and capability has to be proven in battle, not with threats. And today, we proved our capability, Zixth finished for him, the shape of a new idea solidifying in his mind. Yes, you did. You fought with surprising skill alongside us. Your warships, while clearly built more for psychological effect than for a prolonged engagement, were still useful when commanded properly. Your crews adapted to the chaos with a speed I found remarkable. Your actions today earned our respect. Park finally smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his tired face. And that's the key, isn't it? Respect builds alliances. Fear only breeds resentment and down the line, rebellion. You can't hold a galaxy-spanning empire together by scaring everyone into line. Eventually, someone calls your bluff, and if threats are all you have, you don't have a backup plan. You are suggesting we fundamentally change our entire doctrine of expansion, Zixth said, stating the radical idea plainly. What I'm suggesting, Park replied, is that you already have. We won't be your servants, but we will be your partners. We'll share technology, coordinate defenses, and help you keep this part of the galaxy safe from things that actually want to devour us all. But we will do it as equals. In that moment, Zixth made a choice, one that could see him stripped of his rank, but one that could also be the salvation of his people. I will take your proposal to the Council, a new path for the hegemony, an offer of partnership, not subjugation, for any species that can prove its strength. They might just laugh at you, Park cautioned. Perhaps. But if there's one thing I've learned today, it's that humanity will not be the last species you meet that isn't afraid of a little thunder and lightning. Look, your psychology might be the norm, but it can't be universal. Sooner or later, the hegemony is going to stumble upon a species that doesn't react to intimidation the way we predict. It's probably a good idea to have a diplomatic option ready before we poke a bear we can't put down. That's a very sharp way to put it, Admiral, Park admitted. Just as Zixth was about to sign off, his communications officer cut in. Admiral, one of our intel analysts has a strange question about human culture. Put him through. Sir, he's asking if humans think our threat displays are funny because they look like they're Halloween decorations, and if Halloween is a holiday where they deliberately try to scare one another for fun. Does that imply the humans were actually enjoying being threatened by us? An incredibly long and awkward silence filled the comm channel. Then, from the bridge of the human flagship, the exact same sound that had kicked off this whole weird situation echoed again. Captain Park was laughing. Admiral, Park said, trying to catch his breath, let me be crystal clear. We weren't laughing because we enjoyed your threat. We were laughing because your threat just wasn't threatening. It was like watching a toddler hide behind a curtain with their feet sticking out, then jump out yelling boo. It's hilarious because the effort to be scary is so intense and the failure is so complete. So if we had just attacked, with no warning, no showmanship, Zixth pressed, Park's laughter vanished in an instant. His expression turned to ice. Then we wouldn't have had any time to laugh. We would have been a little too busy fighting for our lives. And that, Admiral, is the entire point. Things that are actually dangerous don't need to put on a show. They just act. The human vessels began to move, setting a course back toward their own territory. The hegemony fleet just floated there in the quiet void, watching them leave, no longer sure if they'd just met the harmless prey they came to conquer or the apex predator they should have been trying to make friends with the whole time. On the flagship's bridge, a junior officer looked at his commander. Admiral, what are we going to report to the Council? Zixth watched the human ships wink out of existence as they jumped to hyperspace, his mind reeling with the thought of a species that turned fear into a game, that fought with terrifying skill, and was somehow both utterly ridiculous and profoundly horrifying all at once. This is what we're going to tell them, he finally said. We met a species that does not respond to intimidation. Our attempts to frighten them were met with laughter. Later, we fought a common enemy alongside them, and they turned out to be the most capable allies we have ever known. We will also report that humanity rejected our offer of subjugation and instead proposed an alliance between equals. The officer leaned in, lowering his voice. And what if the Council rejects that and orders an attack anyway? Zixth thought about the human ships creating a protective shield around his own. He remembered their cold, lethal precision in the chaos of battle, and he remembered Captain Park's promise to either win or die trying. In that event, Zixth said, we will inform the Council that such a war would be long, costly, and in the end, unwinnable, because humans never, ever give up. As his battered ship limped back from human space, Zixth finally pulled up the intelligence file on the human holiday called Halloween. He swiped through photos of little kids dressed up like monsters, their faces beaming with huge smiles and laughter. He saw images of adults covering their homes in fake skeletons and cobwebs just for kicks. In that moment, everything clicked into place. Humans hadn't just overcome their fears, they had tamed them. They had taken the galaxy's most powerful tool of control, fear itself, and turned it into a children's game. You can't threaten a species like that. The only thing you can do is learn to respect them. And Zixth was just starting to understand that respect was a currency worth far more than fear could ever be. You ever hear that phrase about kicking someone when they're down? Well, for the gargantuan Croc Empire, that wasn't just a saying, it was official policy. From the command deck of his warship, the Crimson Fang, Commander Zethor watched the last defensive satellite of a Velian colony pop into a silent firework of space dust. He crossed his massive arms, a smug warmth spreading through his chest. Another world crushed, another trophy for his emperor. His second-in-command's voice dripped with awe. That makes 47 systems, sir. The Velian resistance fell in just 6 hours. Zethor clicked his mandibles together, the Croc equivalent of a self-satisfied chuckle. 6 hours. He was almost impressed. The Velians were courageous. He'd give them that. But courage doesn't do much against plasma cannons. After 3 centuries of steamrolling their way across the galaxy, the Croc Empire lived by one simple, ugly truth. The only language that matters is overwhelming force. Just then, a sharp ping echoed from the communications hub. It was a message marked with the highest possible priority from High Command. Zethor ambled over, fully expecting new orders to go flatten some other poor species that had gotten too ambitious. But the message on the screen made him pause. A new species had just wandered into their corner of the galaxy. They called themselves humans. They came from the 3rd planet of some boring yellow star. Their technology was a complete joke. They were still using primitive fusion drives, basic energy weapons, and, he had to read this part twice, their ships apparently didn't even have shields. The final summary was blunt. They were zero threat. This was going to be a walk in the park. The images that appeared on his display were so pathetic, he almost snorted. Human ships were clunky, ugly boxes that looked more like museum pieces than starships. The official analysis figured their tech was at least 500 years behind the Croc. "Commander," his weapons officer called out, "we have new orders." "Let me guess," Zethor groaned, putting on an act of extreme boredom. "They want us to go welcome these humans to the neighborhood." "That's right, sir. In fact, they're classifying it as a training exercise for the junior crew. High Command expects we'll have all human settlements pacified within a few hours." A training exercise. Zethor could barely believe the insult. He'd been hoping for a real fight, but orders were orders. Besides, chalking up another conquered species on his service record would certainly look good at his next performance evaluation. "Set a course for their nearest colony," he commanded. "What's this dump called?" "It's New Edinburgh, Commander. Population is about 3 million. Their defenses are, well, they're laughable. A couple of tiny weapon platforms in orbit. They have no real fleet to speak of." 3 million souls. The number was just static to Zethor. "We will give them one chance to surrender. When they say no, we'll turn their orbital junk into dust and get the ground troops ready. Standard procedure." His gigantic fleet of 200 warships moved as one, tearing open a hole in space-time to jump to faster-than-light travel. The trip would take 3 days, which Zethor spent reviewing the intel on these humans. They hailed from a high-gravity world with a single large moon they called Earth. They'd only just figured out how to travel between stars. Their ships were slow, and their weapons were weak. The data showed they had quickly set up 7 colonies in the nearby star systems, and every single one was a sitting duck. They expanded way too fast, his tactical officer noted, gesturing at the star chart. They've spread themselves incredibly thin. It's a classic rookie error. It's a mistake all young races make, Zethor said with the confident air of a seasoned pro. They invent a faster-than-light engine and suddenly think the whole galaxy is theirs for the taking. Then they run into someone like us and they learn a hard lesson. The galaxy doesn't belong to the bold, it belongs to the strong. On the 3rd day, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace right on New Edinburgh's doorstep. "I want a complete sensor sweep now," Zethor ordered. The colony was even more pathetic up close than it was in the files. A single, barely habitable planet, a few space stations for trade, and a handful of tiny patrol ships that looked like they'd lose a fight with an asteroid. "Open a channel," Zethor barked. "Broadcast on all frequencies." His communications officer gave a sharp nod. "Channel is open, Commander." Zethor's voice, translated into the common galactic tongue, boomed across the system. "Attention, human colonists of New Edinburgh. This is Commander Zethor of the unstoppable Croc Empire. You are trespassing in our territory. You have one of your hours to surrender unconditionally. If you refuse to comply, we will utterly annihilate your orbital defenses and begin a ground invasion. This is your final warning." He killed the feed, leaned back in his command chair, and simply waited. New species only ever did one of 3 things. They either folded immediately, begged for their miserable lives, or put up some kind of pointless heroic fight. 5 whole minutes ticked by. Then a new voice, calm and composed, crackled over the ship's speakers. "Commander Zethor, this is Governor Chen from New Edinburgh." The voice was human, definitely male, and sounded way too relaxed for the situation. "We got your message. I just thought it would be fair to inform you that this little colony is under the protection of the Terran Colonial Navy. My strong advice, turn your fleet around and let's avoid any unnecessary trouble. Please, think long and hard about what you do next." A loud, rattling laugh echoed as Zethor clicked his mandibles together. Unnecessary trouble? The tiny human spoke like he had a choice in the matter, as if his pathetic little ships could do more than scratch the paint on 200 top-of-the-line warships. "Sir, the human is refusing to stand down," his second-in-command stated, pointing out the obvious. "Then we proceed as planned," Zethor replied, his voice turning cold as ice. "Target their platforms in orbit, turn them into space dust, but leave the planet alone for now. Once they see their shields in the sky vanish, they'll start singing a very different song." The fleet surged forward like a single colossal predator. It was a cruel little dance the Croc had perfected over centuries. And honestly, it was getting kind of boring. The human platforms fired first, sending a volley of what looked like primitive rockets their way. The rockets burst against the Croc shields with all the force of throwing pebbles at a mountain. In reply, 50 of Zethor's warships fired their plasma cannons in one perfectly synchronized blast. The orbital stations didn't even explode. They just vaporized, replaced by silent, expanding bubbles of pure heat. But then, something felt wrong. "Commander," the sensor officer called out, his voice thick with confusion. "The civilian ships are pulling out, but they're not panicking. They're moving in perfect, organized formations. There's no chaos, sir. None at all." Zethor leaned forward, his eyes glued to the main display. The officer was right. The human ships were retreating with the kind of discipline he'd only ever seen in a veteran fleet. Where was the fear? Where were the frantic calls for mercy? "They aren't even trying to fight back," his weapons officer added. "But they aren't surrendering either," Zethor muttered, feeling the first tiny prickle of doubt. "Press the attack. They'll break eventually." Just then, the sensor officer shot up from his station. "Commander, new contact. It's coming from behind the planet's moon. Just a single ship, but its size. Commander, it's enormous. It has 3 times the mass of our own flagship." Zethor's head whipped around to the main view screen. A massive, dark silhouette was gliding into view. As it caught the light, every alarm on the bridge started screaming at once. Its hull was made of some weird, dark material that just seemed to eat light. Its energy signature was literally off the charts, and for something so gigantic, it moved with a silent, horrifying grace. "That can't be a human vessel," his tactical officer breathed, his voice dripping with disbelief. But as the ship drew closer, a crystal-clear signal cut through all the noise, broadcasting its name in both his own language and the galactic standard, TCNS Indomitable, a Terran colonial navy ship listed as a destroyer class. A destroyer? Zethor's mind completely short-circuited. If that absolute monster was what these humans called a destroyer, then what in the name of the stars did they call a battleship? For the first time in his long and decorated career, Commander Zethor felt a cold, unfamiliar sensation crawling up his spine. It was fear. The human ship prowled toward them like a shark circling its prey, its hull a flat, non-reflective black that seemed to swallow the very light around it. The entire ship was a masterpiece of sharp, deadly angles, bristling with weapons that looked way too big to even be real. "I want a full scan of that ship now!" Zethor barked, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "I want to know every single thing about it." His officer's hands were a blur across the console. "Sir, our sensors can't penetrate its hull. The material is completely unknown. And its energy readings, they don't match anything in any known galactic database. Commander, the amount of power it's putting out should be physically impossible for a ship that size." "Nothing is impossible," Zethor snapped, but even he didn't believe his own words. "It's one ship. We have 200. Just then the comms channel opened. A human woman's face filled the main screen. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat military bun. Her uniform was immaculate, and her expression was completely calm, as if facing down a fleet of 200 enemy warships was the most boring part of her Tuesday. "Commander Zethor," she stated, her voice steady and cool in perfect galactic common. "I am Captain Park of the Terran colonial navy ship, the Indomitable. You have launched an unprovoked attack on a colony under Terran protection. This is your first and only chance to withdraw your forces peacefully. I strongly suggest you take it." Zethor's initial shock was instantly replaced by a wave of pure boiling rage. The nerve! How dare this primitive creature speak to him as if she held all the cards? He had 200 warships. She had one. "Captain Park," he spat back, packing as much contempt as he could into her lower rank. "I am Commander Zethor of the mighty Kroth Empire, and I don't take suggestions from a species that just learned how to leave its own solar system. You are outnumbered 200 to 1. I will give you the same deal I gave your little friends down on that rock. Surrender now, or be erased from existence." But Captain Park's expression didn't change one bit. No fear, no hesitation, just a cold, professional calm that sent an unexpected shiver down Zethor's spine. "I see," she replied softly. "You have made your choice. The consequences are now yours to face alone." The communication link cut out. "Arrogant human," Zethor's second-in-command muttered beside him. "She can't possibly believe one big ship can fight our entire fleet." "All ships," Zethor broadcast to the fleet, his voice ringing with a confidence he no longer felt. "Target the human vessel. Prepare to unleash everything we have on my mark. It is time we taught these humans what happens when they defy the Kroth Empire." 200 warships moved into a perfect attack formation, their weapon systems humming with incredible power. Plasma cannons whined as they charged to maximum output. Missile ports slid open, revealing countless rows of deadly warheads. Every single weapon in the fleet locked onto that one lonely human ship. "Fire!" Zethor roared. The space between the two forces erupted in a blinding storm of pure energy. It was a tsunami of plasma, scorching laser beams, and hundreds upon hundreds of missiles all slamming into the Indomitable at the exact same time. It was enough power to crack a planet in half, more than enough to obliterate an entire fleet of lesser ships. The barrage lasted for a full 30 seconds. When the blinding light finally faded, Zethor leaned forward, expecting to see nothing but drifting wreckage. Everyone on that bridge was expecting to see twisted metal and the frozen bodies of the crew tumbling through the cold, dark void. But instead, the human ship, the Indomitable, was just there, totally unharmed. 200 of the Empire's most powerful ships had just unleashed absolute hell, and it didn't have a single scratch on it. Its shields hadn't even flickered. All of that incredible destructive power had done absolutely nothing. And if you think that's insane, you will not believe what they did next. If you're enjoying this story, do me a solid and smash that like button and subscribe for more. Impossible, somebody whispered from the bridge. Zethor couldn't tell if it was one of his officers or the thought screaming inside his own skull. "Sensors!" he shouted. "Report! Did we miss?" "No, Commander," the sensor officer replied, his voice trembling. "Every shot hit its mark, but their shields, they just absorbed it. The energy just vanished. Sir, our weapons had zero effect." Zethor just stared at the view screen, his mind completely unable to process what he was seeing. It just wasn't possible. No shield technology in the known universe could absorb a blow like that without at least showing some strain. Unless everything they thought they knew about these humans was a terrifying, catastrophic lie. The comms channel crackled on again, and Captain Park's face filled the screen once more. Her expression was exactly the same. She had the disappointed look of a teacher who just watched her student fail the simplest quiz imaginable. "You've had your chance to fire," she said, her voice as cold and empty as space itself. "All ships, evasive maneuvers now!" Zethor screamed into the fleet-wide channel, realizing a split second too late that the game was already over. The Indomitable fired a single weapon. A lone railgun on its front lit up for less than a heartbeat, launching a projectile so impossibly fast that it was completely invisible to the naked eye. Imagine spending your whole life thinking you're the apex predator, only to find out you just poked a sleeping dragon. In the time it took to blink, a single tungsten slug tore across the massive gulf of space. It slammed dead center into Zethor's flagship, the legendary Crimson Fang. The ship's shields, the same ones that had weathered 100 battles, just vanished like a soap bubble. The projectile ripped through the warship's reinforced hull like it was wet paper. The colossal vessel bucked once, a violent shudder, before being sheared perfectly in two by the sheer kinetic force. Zethor was sent flying across the bridge, crashing hard against his command throne as warning sirens blared to life. Half of his crew were instantly ejected into the cold vacuum of space. Shimmering emergency force fields snapped into place, just barely holding the atmosphere inside the command center. "Report!" he somehow managed to choke out over the screaming alarms. "The ship is gone, Commander," his second-in-command stated, his voice hollow and defeated. "We're only alive because this command pod is armored. Life support is good for maybe a few hours." Zethor staggered to his feet, staring at the few screens still flickering online. The entire back half of his flagship was now just a mangled cloud of debris, tumbling silently with its engines cold and dead. The front section, where he was stranded, was completely dark. But that wasn't what sent a spike of ice through his veins. The human warship hadn't moved an inch. It was just hanging there, watching. It could have wiped out his entire fleet with that one shot if it had aimed for the center of their formation. It had the power, the pinpoint accuracy, and the godlike technology. But it only fired once. They were sending a message, and it was terrifyingly clear. The humans could have wiped them from existence in a single, fiery moment. But they didn't. They chose to demonstrate restraint. They chose to prove their absolute, crushing superiority without resorting to a massacre. "Commander," the communications officer stammered, "the fleet is waiting for orders." Orders? What could he possibly tell them? To attack? Every single one of them just saw their best ship get annihilated. Their weapons were children's toys compared to that. To retreat? That would be admitting a humiliating, soul-crushing defeat. It would mean the great Kroth Empire, conquerors of 47 star systems, had been brought to its knees by one ship from a race they'd dismissed as primitives. Zethor looked at the sheer terror etched on the faces of his remaining crew. These were proud young warriors, brought up to believe in the divine destiny of the Kroth Empire. Now, their eyes were wide with nothing but raw, unfiltered fear. "All ships," he finally commanded, the words tasting like acid in his mouth. "Stand down. I repeat, do not engage the human vessel. Put them on screen." The Indomitable hung in the blackness, perfectly still, a massive predator watching its wounded prey, just waiting to see if it would be foolish enough to fight back, waiting to see if the Kroth had learned their lesson or if another one needed to be taught. In that single soul-shattering moment, Zethor finally understood. The humans weren't taking their first clumsy steps out of their solar system. They had been out here for a very, very long time, watching, learning, and preparing. And when they finally showed their hand, they did it with technology so advanced it made the entire Kroth armada look like a bunch of kids playing with bath toys. In a single heartbeat, the hunters had become the hunted, their own arrogance blinding them to the trap until it had already snapped shut. A cold wave of panic flooded the Kroth fleet's channels. Zethor could hear it in the frantic voices of his captains. These were hardened veterans who now sounded like terrified children. "Commander, what are your orders?" one of them begged, his voice cracking. "Do we fight?" another shouted. "Should we run for it?" a third pleaded. Zethor had no answers. His flagship was a tomb, his fleet was paralyzed, and the human ship just waited with chilling patience, like a teacher waiting for the class to finally understand how badly they had screwed up. Then, some of his captains made the choice for him. 5 ships broke from the formation and fled, their engines flaring as they desperately tried to reach the edge of the system and jump to light speed. "Fools," Zethor whispered. Did they honestly think they could outrun that thing? But the human ship, the Indomitable, didn't bother to chase them. It just floated in the void, its weapon ports dark. Captain Park was letting them go. But why? The reason hit Zethor with the force of a physical blow. She was letting them go to spread the story. The humans didn't just want a victory. They wanted everyone to know. They wanted the entire galaxy to hear about what happened here today. Fueled by a deadly cocktail of pride and terror, other captains chose to fight. 30 warships surged forward, charging the human vessel with every weapon they had blazing in a chaotic, desperate assault. A storm of plasma, lasers, and missiles once again lit up the darkness. The Indomitable finally moved. It didn't dodge or weave. It simply advanced, its shields absorbing every single hit without so much as a flicker. Then it returned fire, not with the massive railgun that had shattered Zethor's ship, but with its smaller secondary systems. Point defense turrets locked onto each enemy ship with horrifying precision. Laser cannons fired in a blistering rhythm, each shot placed with surgical skill, designed to disable, not to destroy. The first Kroth ship's engines erupted in a plume of fire. The second had its weapon systems melted into useless slag. The third began to tumble end over end as its maneuvering thrusters were neatly sliced away. One by one, the charging warships were systematically dismantled. In less than 3 minutes, 30 warships were dead in the water. Not a single one was destroyed. Their crews were alive, but they were utterly helpless, adrift like broken toys in a bathtub. "By the spirits of our ancestors," Zethor's second-in-command breathed, his voice filled with awe. "They aren't even trying." And that was the most terrifying part. The human ship moved with an effortless grace, as if it were simply swatting at gnats. There was no sense of urgency, no sign of strain, nothing to suggest that this battle was anything more than routine target practice. Zethor pushed through the pain and humiliation, forcing himself to think. He replayed every intelligence report he'd read on the humans, their primitive engines, their clunky weapons, their non-existent shields. Every single report had been a lie. How was that possible? The Kroth had one of the best intelligence agencies in the galaxy. They had observed the humans for months before launching this simple invasion, analyzing every nut and bolt on their ships. So how in the universe did they get it so catastrophically wrong? As his own dying flagship groaned around him, the answer hit Zethor with a force 1,000 times more devastating than the railgun slug. The humans hadn't made a mistake. They had let the Croth see exactly what they wanted them to see. Those pathetic ships, that ancient tech, the paper-thin defenses. It was all an act. A massive, galaxy-wide performance. But for what purpose? It was a test. The humans had been watching the Croth just as closely, waiting for them to reveal their true nature. And the second they attacked that defenseless colony, the humans revealed theirs. They were baiting us, Zethor whispered, the words getting caught in his throat. The whole time they knew we would come. But what are you talking about, Commander? His first mate asked, his voice trembling. The humans, Zethor said, his own voice heavy with the sick realization. They've been out here a lot longer than we thought. Way longer. They watched us conquer other worlds. They studied our strategies, our weapons, our greed. They knew we would see them as an easy target. They knew we would attack, and they planned for this exact moment from the very beginning. It made a horrible kind of sense. The humans hadn't just stumbled onto the galactic stage when they figured out faster-than-light travel. They showed up because they chose to. They hadn't built their fleet to counter the current powers of the galaxy. They built it to counter any enemy that could ever exist, even threats that were still millennia away. And in doing so, they had accidentally become more powerful than anything that did exist. The comms panel flickered to life one last time. Captain Park's face appeared, and for the first time, Zethor felt like he was actually seeing her. She looked young for a captain, maybe not even 40 of his people's years, yet her eyes held the ancient, weary wisdom of someone who had fought wars for survival, not for sport. Commander Zethor, she said, her voice as calm and unshakable as a mountain. I'm going to explain a few things to you. I suggest you listen very, very carefully, because your life and the lives of what's left of your crew depend on you understanding me. Zethor remained silent. What was there to say? The Indomitable, she continued, is a destroyer-class ship. Captain Park's voice was as cold as the void outside. This ship, she stated flatly, is just one of 12 identical vessels we have stationed in this tiny corner of space. Across the entire Terran colonial navy, we have 400 ships in this class alone, and that's just the beginning. Above destroyers, we have cruisers. Above them, battleships. And at the very top are dreadnoughts. Each class is exponentially larger and more powerful than the one before it. She paused, letting the weight of her words crush him. My ship carries a crew of 800. We've been on patrol for 5 years. In all that time, we have never fired our main cannons at another living soul. Today was a first. Do you grasp what that means? Zethor understood with chilling clarity. It meant humanity possessed a level of power so overwhelming they'd never even had a reason to flex it. Not until the Croth had finally pushed them too far. Your spies called us primitive, Captain Park went on, her face a mask. And you know what? You weren't wrong about where we were 20 years ago. Your intel was 100% accurate, but we humans learn fast. We adapt, we build. And more than anything else, we always plan for the absolute worst-case scenario. She let that hang in the air. Through the spiderweb of cracks on his view screen, Zethor could see the silent, drifting coffins that were once his fleet. Humanity spent 500 years at war with itself, Captain Park said, her voice dropping to a low, somber tone. On our home world, we mastered the art of combat. We built weapons that could have snuffed out all life, and we came dangerously close to doing it on 3 different occasions. We learned a very hard lesson. Strength without wisdom is just a fast track to oblivion. Power without discipline is a one-way ticket to extinction. She leaned in slightly, her eyes like chips of ice. When we finally reached the stars, we found species just like you, empires built on subjugation. We watched you steamroll the Velians, the Taurans, the Hikari. For decades, we argued about whether to show ourselves or stay hidden. And then, you hit New Edinburgh. Zethor's voice was a dry rattle. We only wanted— I know exactly what you wanted. Captain Park sliced through his excuse, her tone like a razor. That's why we let you get this far. That's why we didn't vaporize your fleet the moment you jumped into our system. We needed to send a message, Commander, not just to your people, but to every bully in this galaxy who thinks they have the right to take whatever they want." Zethor stared at the wreckage of his bridge, at the still forms of his crew, at the twisted metal of his once unbeatable flagship. "Message received," he managed to force out, the words tasting like ash. "Good," Captain Park said. "Now, this is what happens next. We are going to rescue your surviving crew. We are going to provide medical attention to your wounded. We will restore life support on any of your ships that can still hold air. Then, you will fly back to your homeworld and tell your leaders precisely what happened here today." "They'll demand revenge," Zethor said, his voice faint. "The Empire will just send a bigger fleet." Captain Park didn't even flinch. "Then we will send more messages, as many as it takes for the lesson to sink in. This is our version of mercy, Commander Zethor. I suggest you remember this day, because you will not get a second one." Within the hour, the human rescue mission was in full swing. From the smoking ruins of his command center, Zethor watched as smaller ships launched from the gargantuan human warship, the TCS Indomitable. They were impossibly slick, impossibly agile, and they moved with the same terrifying purpose as the vessel that had just ripped his fleet to shreds. "Commander," his communications officer gasped, "the humans are hailing us. They're offering to provide medical assistance." "Accept it," Zethor snapped with no time for pride. He couldn't afford it. The air was growing thin, and the moans of his injured crew were fading. A few minutes later, a human shuttle locked onto his crippled ship. The airlock hissed open, and 3 figures in heavy environment suits stepped aboard, moving methodically as they checked for hazards and tested the atmosphere. When they removed their helmets, a wave of disbelief crashed over Zethor. The warriors who had just wiped out his armada were kids. They looked like they'd barely reached adulthood by his people's standards. One of them, pointing to a medical symbol on her uniform, asked, "Are you Commander Zethor?" Zethor's voice was a ragged whisper. "Why? Why are you helping us? We came here to destroy you." The medic, whose name tag read Chen, gave him a look he couldn't decipher, a strange brew of pity and a deep, ancient sadness. "Because leaving you to die out here would make us no better than you are," she said simply. "Now, let's get your people taken care of." The humans went to work with a horrifying efficiency. They deployed portable life support generators, used medical devices that sealed wounds faster than anything Zethor had ever witnessed, and patched the gaping holes in his ship's hull. There was no boasting, no insults. They just worked, like janitors cleaning up a terrible spill. 2 hours later, Zethor found himself being led through the halls of the human flagship, the TCS Indomitable. The ship was so far beyond his own top-of-the-line warship that it felt like a relic from a forgotten age. Every corridor was immaculate, and the vessel's systems hummed with a quiet, immense power. Even weirder, the human crew members barely shot him a second look as they walked by, as if having the enemy commander on their bridge was a perfectly normal Tuesday. He was brought to a briefing room where Captain Park was waiting. She sat at a huge table with a glowing holographic map floating over it and simply pointed to an empty chair. "Please, have a seat," she offered. "Can I get you some water? Our reports indicate your species can drink it." Zethor just collapsed into the chair, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical force. Someone gave him a bulb of water. He took a hesitant sip, half sure it was poisoned, but it was just clean, cool water. "You have an intelligence file on my species," he stated, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. "How long have you been watching us?" "About 3 years," Captain Park answered, her tone completely businesslike. "We flagged your empire as a potential problem shortly after we set up an outpost in this sector. We've analyzed your military doctrine, your tech, your culture. We even learned your language. We know your entire history." A cold fear slithered down Zethor's spine. "So, you knew we were coming?" "We did," she confirmed, without a hint of emotion. "The Crack Empire has never encountered a civilization it saw as weaker without trying to conquer it. You're remarkably consistent that way." The words stung like a whip, mostly because he knew they were absolutely true. Zethor had been taught his whole life that the Crack were the galaxy's chosen people, that it was their destiny to rule over lesser beings. But sitting here on this alien warship, kept alive by the very people he'd meant to slaughter, he was starting to see just how pathetic that belief system was. Captain Park tapped the holographic display, and new images flashed to life. Zethor recognized the planet instantly. "Earth," she said. "Our home. Let me tell you a little bit about us. Our world is a tough place. It has higher gravity than most life-bearing planets, the weather is incredibly violent, and it's filled with predators that would give your most elite soldiers nightmares. For humans, evolution was basically one long, brutal war for survival. We weren't the strongest things on our own planet, not even close. We had to get smart just to avoid becoming dinner." The hologram shifted again, showing scenes from humanity's own bloody past, savage wars, terrifying weapons, and entire cities being erased from existence. "We spent 5,000 years fighting each other," Captain Park went on. "We would build these incredible civilizations, only to burn them to the ground. We became experts in death, nerve agents, engineered plagues, atomic bombs. On 3 separate occasions, we came within a week of making ourselves completely extinct." Zethor watched horrified as the holographic cities disappeared in blinding flashes of white light. He saw those sickening mushroom clouds bloom and understood that millions had died in the blink of an eye. "But nearly destroying ourselves taught us something vital," Captain Park said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "It taught us that strength by itself is worthless. A victory without wisdom is just a slower way of losing. We nearly died because we were too powerful for our own good." The images flickered again, this time showing the development of human starships. He saw clumsy, primitive rockets become more sophisticated designs, and finally, the fusion-powered vessels his scouts had seen. But then, new ships appeared, ships so advanced they looked like they were forged by gods. "When we finally cracked faster-than-light travel, we spent an entire decade just debating if we should even introduce ourselves to the rest of the galaxy," she said. "Instead, we sent out probes, silent observers. We learned about everyone out here, the peaceful merchants, the territorial clans, and the expansionist empires, like you." A terrifying realization started to dawn in Zethor's mind. "You were afraid." "We were cautious," she corrected him gently. "There's a big difference. We designed our entire military to deal with the absolute worst-case scenario." We kept asking ourselves one question. What if we meet someone whose technology is centuries beyond our own? What if we encounter an enemy so powerful that a fight is hopeless? How would we survive that? She waved her hand at the ship around us. "This is our solution. We decided to create power so overwhelming, so absolute, that there'd be no question. But we chained it to a strict code of self-control. Every warship we build is designed to fight a hypothetical enemy we hope to never encounter. Our cannons can crack a planet open like a nutshell. Our shields can take the heat of a star-going supernova. Our ships are faster and can travel farther than anything else in this galaxy." A cold, heavy dread washed over me. All this time, my people, the Crack, had been rampaging across the galaxy, believing we were titans. We thought our victories were proof of our superiority. The reality was, we'd just been incredibly lucky. Lucky we'd never poked the sleeping giant, and even luckier that this giant chose peace when it had the power to choose anything it wanted. "So why show yourselves now?" I finally choked out. "Why not just remain a myth?" "Because hiding is not the same thing as living," Captain Park replied. "And because we saw what your empire does to those who can't defend themselves. The Valians, the Taurans, entire species you snuffed out before they even had a chance to reach for the stars. We thought about stepping in, but we decided it wasn't our job to police the galaxy." Her gaze sharpened, drilling right into me. "Then you attacked New Edinburgh, a civilian outpost filled with families. You gave them a single hour to surrender their entire world, and then you started vaporizing their space stations for sport. You forced our hand." We We thought you were defenseless, I admitted, the words tasting like poison. We know, she said. That was the whole idea. But being defenseless isn't an invitation to be conquered. And being vulnerable is not a justification for violence. My people learned those lessons the hard way, at a cost you couldn't possibly comprehend. And now, it looks like it's our turn to be the teachers. Captain Park got up and walked over to the massive viewport. Outside, the shattered remains of the crack invasion fleet tumbled silently through the blackness. I'm going to tell you something that isn't a state secret, she said. The TCS Indomitable is 5 years old. In that time, we've mapped 20 different star systems. We've made peaceful first contact with 4 other species that could have turned hostile. None of them did, because a simple show of our capabilities was enough to make them realize a war would be a very, very bad idea. Today was the first time in 5 years I've had to fire my main weapon at another living creature. She turned back to me, her face like carved stone. Do you realize what that means? Humanity built the most powerful military in this entire quadrant of the galaxy with the #1 goal of never, ever having to use it. We win by making it crystal clear that starting a fight with us is just a creative form of suicide. That's what real strength is. My mind reeled, flashing through my own long career. 47 star systems brought to heel, hundreds of battles won, countless lives extinguished. I had always seen myself as a great warrior, but I had only ever picked fights I was sure I could win. So, what happens to us now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Captain Park sat back down in her command chair. Now, you go home, she said, her voice calm. You tell your emperor everything you've seen. You make him understand that humanity is not defenseless, we are not primitive, and we are not the easy targets you were hoping for. She told me, you tell them that we offer peace and partnership to anyone who approaches us with respect. But if they don't listen, and here her face became a mask of ice, if they send another fleet, we will tear it apart, and the one after that. Eventually, your Krothic Empire will learn that attacking humanity is a fatal mistake. The only real question is how many of your own people you're willing to throw away before you finally get the message. It was a long 3 months before I stood before the High Council of the Krothic Empire. 3 months of limping back in our broken ships, 3 months of silent, haunting travel through the void, and 3 months of sleepless nights replaying that one-sided battle in my mind. 3 months of pure, gut-twisting fear, because I knew I had to deliver a message that would shatter the very bedrock of my civilization. What would you do if you were on trial for your life, not because you made a mistake, but because you told the truth? That was the nightmare I was living. I was standing alone in a colossal cavern carved out of the heart of my home world, staring up at 12 of our empire's most decorated commanders. They scowled down at me from their massive thrones, their faces practically dripping with disgust. The eldest finally spoke, his voice a low rumble like a coming earthquake. Commander Zethar, he began, you took a fleet of 200 of our best warships to crush a primitive human colony. You came back with 137 crippled ships, and 63 are simply gone. More than 4,000 of our finest soldiers are dead. Now, you will tell us why we shouldn't have you executed for this complete disaster. I had rehearsed this speech 1,000 times, but standing there, my life depended on them believing a truth so wild it sounded like pure fantasy. Honored Council, I started, my voice staying firm, even though my insides were twisting into knots. Our intel on the humans wasn't just wrong. It was a catastrophic deception. They aren't primitive. They aren't weak. In fact, they are by far the most advanced civilization we have ever met. The chamber fell dead silent until one of the younger commanders snorted with laughter. Advanced? They just barely figured out how to travel faster than light. No, I snapped back, my voice bouncing off the stone walls. They let us think that. The truth is, humanity has had this tech for centuries. They've been observing us, analyzing our strategies, our ships, our every last weakness. When we attacked their colony, we weren't the predators, we were the prey, walking straight into a trap they had laid just for us. I gave the signal, and a holographic display flared to life in the middle of the room. It replayed the battle. You could see our entire armada just pouring firepower onto a single human ship, the Indomitable. Our most powerful cannons hit their shields and just died like sparks hitting a brick wall. Then, the hologram showed their response. One single, brilliant beam of light that sliced my own flagship clean in two. "One human ship," I said, my voice steady. And it wasn't even one of their main battleships. It neutralized our fleet and didn't get a single scratch on its paint. Their shields are unbreakable. Their hulls are made from materials we can't even identify. Their weapons unleash 10 times more energy than our top scientists believed was even possible. Another commander shot to his feet. "Then why are you alive? If they're so mighty, why did they let you return?" "That," I said, my voice dropping so low it was almost a whisper, "is the most critical part of my report. They let us go because they needed someone to carry a message. They sent me back to tell you exactly what I witnessed." I locked eyes with each council member. Humanity does not want war. They could have vaporized our entire fleet. Instead, they surgically disabled our ships, rescued every last survivor, treated our wounded, and then sent us on our way. The human captain, a woman named Park, told me directly, "Their greatest weapon is the one they never have to fire. They achieve victory by making it painfully clear that picking a fight with them is just another way to ask for annihilation." The eldest commander leaned forward, his ancient eyes narrowed into tiny slits. "Are you suggesting we've encountered a power greater than our own? A power that chooses peace instead of conquest?" "Yes, honored elder. And I'm telling you that we need to learn from them. The Krothek Empire has always operated on a single rule: the strong take what they want. But humanity is showing us a different way. They are stronger than us in every measurable category, and yet they have zero interest in ruling us." "That's a weakness," one of the other commanders yelled. "They're cowards, afraid to use the power they possess." "No," I countered, surprised by my own conviction. "It's not weakness, it's wisdom." Captain Park explained that humanity nearly wiped itself out 3 different times with its own inventions. They learned the hardest lesson in the universe. Power without control is just a spectacular form of self-destruction. They built their military to be impossibly strong for one single reason: so they would never, ever be forced to use it. For 300 years, my people, the Krothek, were convinced we were the baddest species in the galaxy. Our entire culture was founded on the principle of might makes right. So when we decided to go and stomp out the humans, I figured it was just another Tuesday. But what if everything you were taught about strength was completely backward? What if real power wasn't about dominating everyone else, but about having the strength not to? As I was being pulled from the wreckage of my own flagship by the very people I was sent to destroy, it finally clicked. And now, standing before my own leaders, I had to convince them that our entire way of life was a dangerous fantasy. The silence in the chamber was so heavy you could almost touch it. You could practically hear their minds fighting against a truth they didn't want to accept. Finally, the eldest commander spoke again. "So what is your recommendation, Commander? That we simply roll over and surrender?" "No," I said calmly. "No," I said. "I recommend we go and talk to them. The humans are offering a peaceful alliance to anyone who approaches them as an equal," I explained, my voice echoing in the tense silence of the council chamber. "They have technology we can't even begin to comprehend, knowledge that could save our empire from becoming a dusty relic. They want to help us." One of the councilmen let out a short, ugly laugh. "Or we could build a bigger fleet and avenge this humiliation." A cold dread washed over me. "That fleet will be torn apart, just like mine was," I said, my voice dead flat. "Captain Park made it perfectly clear they will defend themselves, and they have 400 ships exactly like the one we fought, and that's not even counting their bigger, scarier models. If we send 1,000 of our greatest warships, they'll dismantle every single one like a child breaking a toy. And they won't even call it a war, because to them, it won't even be a real fight. You almost sound like you admire them, another council member sneered, his words dripping with poison. I do, I shot back without a second of hesitation. They are everything we pretend to be, brilliant, powerful, and utterly unbeatable. The only difference is they balance that power with wisdom. They could rule the galaxy by brute force if they chose to. Instead, they're just asking for friends. The argument dragged on for hours, but I held my ground. I countered every challenge, played the flight recorder data from my ship for the whole room to see, and hammered home the one truth they couldn't escape. This was not an enemy we could ever hope to defeat. At long last, the eldest council member rose to his feet. The council has reached a decision. We will send diplomats to the humans. We will sue for peace. But you need to understand something, Commander Zethor, he warned, his voice like rocks grinding together. You have asked us to gamble the entire future of our people on your story. If you're wrong about these humans, if this is some kind of elaborate trick, your life is forfeit. I understand, I replied. But I'm not wrong. I saw what they are capable of. The only reason I'm alive is because they chose to show mercy. The choice is simple. We can either evolve and join the galactic community, or we can become a forgotten footnote in a history book about arrogant empires that refuse to accept the future. 2 months later, our diplomatic ships eased into orbit around the planet Earth. There were no weapons locked on us, only polite and professional greetings. Negotiations for peace and a technology exchange treaty began. I was there, not as a commander anymore, but as an advisor, staring down at that beautiful blue and white marble from an observation deck. It was a breathtakingly beautiful planet. I could easily see how a world of such intense and sometimes brutal beauty could forge such a tough and resilient species. A human diplomat, Ambassador Martinez, came and stood next to me. Commander Zethor, she said, using my old title as a sign of respect. I wanted to thank you personally. Captain Park told us what you did. You chose wisdom when most people in your position would have chosen pride. I managed a weak, tired smile. It's an easy choice to make when your pride is about 2 seconds away from getting you and your entire crew turned into space dust. That's a fair point, she laughed. But you would be surprised how many would still choose pride. We've read our own history books. Every single empire built on conquest eventually falls apart. They either rot from the inside or they finally pick a fight with someone stronger, she continued. We just decided we wanted to be the ones to finally break that cycle. It took me a second for the weight of her words to sink in. So you built a power so overwhelming, I said, the true scale of it finally dawning on me, that you would never even be tempted to use it to conquer anyone. Exactly. It's a lot easier to maintain the peace when every other species in the galaxy knows that starting a war with you would mean their complete and total annihilation, and for us, it would just be a colossal waste of time. We call it peace through strength, but it's a strength that is always guided by wisdom. Strength by itself just starts a bigger arms race that, in the end, nobody ever wins. I thought about our own empire, the 47 systems we ruled with an iron fist, all the species we controlled through fear. I thought about how much energy we wasted just holding on to what we already had. I think, I said, a new kind of understanding in my voice, the Krothek have a great deal to learn from you, and none of it has anything to do with building better spaceships. For generations, our single focus was conquest, I admitted. It never even occurred to us to stop and ask what the point of it all was. Ambassador Martinez offered a kind smile. Realizing you've been on the wrong path is the first step to finding a better one. Who knows? A few hundred years from now, the Krothek Empire might not be remembered for the systems it conquered, but for the new worlds it helped create. I let out a long breath. Maybe. For the first time in what felt like forever, a tiny spark of hope flickered to life inside me. Through the window, human ships, the same design that had obliterated my fleet, drifted by like silent guardians. They were the keepers of a peace so absolute it was backed by a power we could barely imagine. I can still feel that ice-cold terror from 3 months ago, watching my own flagship get ripped to shreds. I used to see that human ship as a nightmare. Now, I realized I was looking at our only hope. In one terrifying flash, I saw our entire destiny. It wasn't a galaxy dominated by the faction with the biggest ships, but one where real strength was a shield to protect everyone, not a club to beat them into submission. The moment that single human ship appeared, every Krothek knew with a bone-deep certainty that our ancient warrior code was nothing but a quick path to extinction. But behind that terrifying power, we found something we never expected. A chance to be better, an invitation to join a galactic family built on partnership instead of fear. It's not going to be easy. Old habits die hard. We still have warmongers back home screaming for one last glorious battle, one final charge to prove we're still strong. But their voices get quieter every single day, drowned out by the simple, undeniable truth of what humanity has become. I pressed my hand against the cold window, staring down at Earth. What a savage world to have produced such a species, I thought. It had clearly made its people just as tough, and yet somehow that endless struggle for survival had taught them empathy. Their own countless wars against each other had shown them the real power of cooperation. After staring their own extinction in the face, they finally understood that true strength isn't about crushing your enemies, it's having the wisdom to let them live. "We saw their main battleship," I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. And in that instant, we knew. The war was over before a single shot was even fired. We were hopelessly outmatched. They just chose not to wipe us from existence. And that single act of mercy, it changed the entire galaxy forever.